All right, U.S. history students, we are going to move on to our next unit, which is going to be a study of the early antebellum era. It is going to cover everything that you see here under the blue bracket. So it's going to cover presidencies of Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, and Jackson, and then the themes associated with the War of 1812, the Era of Good Feelings, and then Jacksonian democracy and the rise of the common man. Okay, so the election of 1800 was a turning point in U.S. history. It marks the first time that a political party peacefully transfers power to a different political party. So one group transfers power to another group that has a very different set of beliefs and ideas. And for the reason that it is a peaceful transfer of power from one group to another, this election is also known as the Revolution of 1800. Now, Thomas Jefferson defeats John Adams in this election with 73 electoral votes. It's a very, very close election. John Adams was definitely seen as a incredibly important and valued member of the group of founding fathers, but the actions taken during his administration as a result of the XYZ affair and the Alien and Sedition Acts does damage his popularity. During his inaugural address, Thomas Jefferson makes an attempt to unite all Americans by saying, "We are all Republicans, we are all Federalists." And this is a theme you will hear from a lot of presidential inaugural addresses when the presidential election is fairly close. The beginning of Jefferson's presidency is going to mark the start of nearly 30 years of dominance by the Democratic Republicans. So from 1789 to 1801, the Federalists controlled the White House and controlled political movement, so to speak. But then we have a long period of Democratic Republicans who take the White House. We have Thomas Jefferson, we have James Madison, we have James Monroe, and then we have John Quincy Adams, who is coincidentally John Adams' oldest son. At the end of John Quincy Adams' presidency, we're going to see another political shift with the creation of the Democratic Party, and that is the initial president who wins as a Democrat is going to be Andrew Jackson. If you look at this image, and this image sort of captures Jefferson's vision of an ideal America. What role do you think Jefferson wants federal government to play in this ideal America? Jefferson wanted to reverse Federalist policies by reducing the size and cost of the national government. Remember, he's a Democratic Republican whose ideals are closely tied to those of the Anti-Federalists. So they want limited federal government, stronger state government. They definitely do not want things like a national bank. Jefferson believed that the government had grown too large and powerful under Washington, Adams, and under the influence of Alexander Hamilton. So in response, he cuts the size of the army. He eliminates taxes on whiskey, slaves, and property. When I say he eliminates taxes, he eliminates federal taxes. He does not do anything about state taxes. And he allows the charter of the Bank of the United States to expire. So Hamilton had proposed the Bank of the United States, and then rather than engage in a battle over it, he just lets the charter expire. And he focuses on paying down the debt of the federal government in an effort to restore power to state governments. So if we go back to this image, Jefferson believed that America should be an agrarian republic that protects individual liberties and also focuses power on the state level as opposed to the national level. But the Federalists did not want to see their policies destroyed by Jefferson and Democratic Republicans. So Federalists like Alexander Hamilton and John Adams, they believe in a much stronger central government. Federalists believe in a broad interpretation of the Constitution, and they also believe in a strong federal economy and a national bank with the economy focused on industrial interests. Jefferson and Madison are Democratic Republicans. They favor state governments over national government. They favor strict interpretation of the Constitution, and they favor agricultural interests and state-level banks. So in the months before leaving office, President Adams exercises his constitutional authority to appoint judges to federal courts. So if you will remember, during Washington's presidency, the Judiciary Act creates all of the lower courts, all the lower federal courts. So John Adams uses his presidential power to appoint judges to those seats, and he appoints people of his political party. So he appoints Federalists to these positions. Now, these judges that he appoints become known as midnight judges, not necessarily because they were appointed at midnight, but because they were appointed during the twilight of Adams' presidency. Now, the appointments were supposed to be hand-delivered via letter to the person who was receiving the appointment. The majority of these appointments got delivered, but some of them did not get delivered. And so for the ones that did not get delivered, Jefferson orders the Secretary of State, James Madison, to deny some of these appointments, to essentially not deliver the appointments. One of these potential judges who was denied is a guy named William Marbury, and Marbury sues Madison when he is deprived of his position as a federal judge. And the case, Marbury versus Madison of 1803, was one of the most important Supreme Court cases in U.S. history, and really establishes or places the Supreme Court on equal footing with the other two branches of the government. In this case, the Supreme Court ruled that President Jefferson's decision to deny Marbury his judicial appointment did not violate the Judiciary Act or the Constitution. So the argument goes something like this. Marbury believed that Congress created the Judiciary Act to create lower courts with judges, and that he was supposed to be one of those judges. But Jefferson and Madison say, yes, but the president can appoint, not deny, whoever he wants. And so basically, Jefferson says now that he's in office, he's been inaugurated, he's not going to appoint the people that Madison wanted, he's going to appoint the people that he wants. The Marbury versus Madison case, and this is what is really important, so this is what I want you to highlight in your notes. The Marbury versus Madison case establishes the principle of judicial review, giving the Supreme Court the power to declare acts of Congress unconstitutional. And Marbury versus Madison is the case that John Marshall uses essentially to elevate the power of the Supreme Court. So initially, if you look at the Constitution, the legislative branch being the first branch established in the Constitution with the most information written into all of the articles and sections, it appears to be the branch that was most important to the founding fathers. When they create the judicial branch, other than creating the Supreme Court, there's not a whole lot of information written into the Constitution about the judicial branch. The principle of judicial review helps elevate the Supreme Court onto a more equal footing and allows the Supreme Court to declare laws passed by the legislature unconstitutional. So in some cases, they even are able to overturn their own previous decisions because they believe them to be no longer constitutional. Chief Justice John Marshall serves as Chief Justice of the Supreme Court from 1801 to 1835. Over 3 decades, Marshall's ruling helped strengthen the power of the national government over states and protected the rights of citizens. And he is the Chief Justice in all of the cases listed here, and they are all important in terms of strengthening the federal government. So Marbury versus Madison establishes judicial review. You have McCulloch versus Maryland, which is going to involve the National Bank, Dartmouth College v. Woodward, Cohens v. Georgia, Gibbons v. Ogden, and the Cherokee Nation v. Georgia. And we'll talk about all of these more specifically in the unit. So during Jefferson's presidency, and primarily during his first term, his popularity is growing, and then coincidentally at the same time, so is the U.S. population. The U.S. population is growing, and people wanted to move west. And take advantage of the territory gained as a result of the Treaty of 1783. Kentucky becomes an official state in 1792, Tennessee in 1796, and Ohio in 1803. But Jefferson was worried about French control of New Orleans and the Mississippi River. So the French control the Mississippi River and they control the port of New Orleans. And the port of New Orleans is an incredibly important point because it's a really great place to import and export goods. So Jefferson smells an opportunity. Napoleon is ruling France at the time, and he is busy fighting a lot of wars, and he is willing to deal on the lands in North America. And so Jefferson sent a delegation to France to negotiate the purchase of the port of New Orleans. But in sort of a really lucky happenstance, Napoleon wants to sell all of the French territories in America to fund his European wars. So initially, Jefferson sends the delegates, and the delegates think they're just going to buy the port of New Orleans, and they end up buying the entire Louisiana territory for the bargain basement price of $15 million. So in 1803, Congress approves the purchase of Louisiana from the French for $15 million. So this is 800,000 some odd acres, I think, for $15 million. It's pennies an acre, essentially. The Louisiana Purchase doubles the size of the United States. Americans were super excited about gaining all of this new Western land, but the Louisiana Purchase does present some concerns and a few problems. So the first was a problem for Jefferson. Was the purchase constitutional? So despite his belief in strict interpretation, Jefferson used the elastic clause, or otherwise known as the necessary and proper clause, to exercise power to buy the Louisiana territory. There was also a question about what do we do with the French and the Spanish who are currently living in New Orleans. So despite his belief in protecting liberty, Jefferson decides not to grant citizenship to the foreigners living in the territory. And nobody really knew exactly what we had bought. They knew we had bought a lot of acreage, but they weren't really sure what was out there. So in order to discover what exactly it is they had purchased, Jefferson sent a secret mission. He sent two guys, Meriwether Lewis and William Clark, to explore and document their exploration of the Louisiana Territory. Their findings revealed an abundance of natural resources for America. So it turns out that the purchase was a good thing. Jefferson is widely popular at this time and easily wins the election of 1804. So he defeats Pinckney from South Carolina with a whopping 92% of the Electoral College votes, so 176 votes for Jefferson. He easily takes that election. But Jefferson's second term is going to be plagued by problems, particularly with Britain and France. So the war between England and France rages on. They are perpetually fighting each other during this time period. And if you will remember, the fighting between Britain and France results in Washington declaring neutrality. We see the quasi-war during Adams' administration, the XYZ affair, and the passage of the Alien and Sedition Act. So Jefferson isn't going to get away from the Britain and France issues unscathed. And so the war between England and France is going to lead to more attacks on U.S. trade ships. So Britain is the problem, and the British Navy impressed or forced into service more than 1,000 American merchant sailors per year from 1803 to 1807. So they would board American merchant ships. Now, merchant ships are ships for trade. They're not military ships, and would impress or force the sailors on those ships to serve in the British Navy. Jefferson was frustrated with his inability to get England or France to stop the attacks on U.S. ships. So his diplomatic efforts, or his efforts to negotiate a peaceful resolution to this, were unsuccessful. And so rather than engage in actual conflict, what he does is he orders an embargo. And an embargo means that you stop trading with a foreign country. And in 1807, he ordered an embargo and banned all U.S. trade with Britain and France, which means we aren't going to buy any of your products and we aren't going to sell you any of ours. The embargo is an enormous year. Merchants smuggled British and French goods anyway, and they continued trading with Europe. And ultimately, the embargo only hurts the United States economy, and it's a significant blow to the U.S. economy. And then Jefferson, in an effort to enforce the embargo to make sure that it was followed properly, he has to increase the size of the government and military in order to enforce the law, which of course goes against his personal beliefs of limited federal government and limiting the size of the military. So in your notes, what I would like for you to do is to complete this chart using your notes. So in terms of interpretation of the Constitution, what was Jefferson's ideal? What was his belief? And then how did he actually act? What did he actually do during his presidency? Powers of the president. What was his ideal? Remember, he's a Democratic Republican. And then what does he actually do? And the same for the next three questions.